So why don't you begin with Vidyas to honor everybody's time?
Yeah. Sure, Anil, I will do that. And good evening, everybody, and welcome to our guests. Welcome to the participants, audience, and of course, all my colleagues in Soil and SOBD particularly. Uh, we are here to discuss on the new education policy. We have experts here who've been behind the scene consulting, discussing, and part of framing, and of course now part of telling us what's the way forward and what's in it for everybody. Let me introduce my panel today. We have Dr. Ranjan Banerjee. He is with BIT School of Management, Mumbai now. He's the dean there. And he's earlier worked with SP Jain and then previously was with FMCG companies like Asian Paints, Vadilal, HUL, has been consulting at CXO level for leading organizations, BASF, Vodafone, Legrand, Pidilite, and others. And he's authored books, some of them very well selling, Made in India Manager, and he's been awarded the Change Maestro and Institution Builder of the Year Award 2019. He's been recently nominated on the global boards of GMAC and UNPRME, the only nominee from Indian academia on both these boards. Welcome, Dr. Ranjan Banerjee.
Thank you.
We next have Dr. Debashis Chatterjee with us. He is the director of IIM Kozhikode. He's taught leadership classes at Harvard University and at the IIMs, Calcutta, Lucknow, and Kozhikode. Been awarded the Fulbright Fellowship twice for pre-doctoral and postdoctoral work at Harvard University. He's the author of 17 books, including Timeless Leadership. He has served as independent director on the boards of several multinational and Indian companies. He's currently researching on many areas, and his interests and pursuits include corporate and institutional leadership, effective governance, learning organizations, innovation, and Indian ethos in management. Welcome, Dr. Debashis Chatterjee. We then have Professor Rishikesha Krishnan with us, the director of IIM Bangalore. He's mainly from the area of strategy and innovation, has been a visiting scholar at Center for Advanced Study of India, University of Pennsylvania, and at ISB Hyderabad. He held the Jamuna Raghavan Chair for Entrepreneurship at IIMB from 2007 to 10. He is a fellow from IIM Ahmedabad, a Master of Science from Stanford University, and a Master of Science from IIT Kanpur. This is a little bit about the background of the stalwarts that we have in the panel today. We have Anil with us, our founder chairman. He will do a formal welcome of the experts, and then we will go around knowing more about the education panel.
No, what a joy to have, what a joy to have the three wonderful leaders all at the same time. Each one of them is recognized for their uniqueness, and each one of them is asking new questions. And so I just want to say to you, Ranjan, that your work on design thinking has been noticed a lot by industry. Debashish, you bring inner joy to people when they read and they travel with you in the wonderful publishing. And Rishi, you are known as somebody who attempts to build excellence wherever you go, no matter whether it's IIM Indore, Bangalore, you're seen as somebody building excellence in whatever you do. So, very, very wonderful to know each one of you. And all three of you also have this tremendous humility, which means you have this, wonderful self energy from inside, which kind of makes it possible for you to ask new questions. And, in Soil, we have been attempting to ask new questions. It's been quite an interesting journey for us. And I remember way back when the education policy was written during Rajiv Gandhi's time, some of us were involved in drafting that policy. And some of us actually wrote a significant part of that along with Dr. Mitra, who used to be BITS Pilani director. And, some of us were part of that group. So very interesting from there to now. And, when I read this education policy, I said, wow, this is something really nice and new. And at the same time, the question came, when will all this actually manifest? So I'm sure all of us have many questions in our hearts, and we also have those kinds of new things. So with these opening comments, Vidya, please take over and lead us through this process or facilitate this process from learning from the wisdom of three wonderful friends and leaders. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, Anil, thank you. We will begin by understanding what this education policy is about, some background to it, and I would love each of our panelists to give us an overarching, view, their perspectives, broad perspectives, a macro level view for us to understand the scenario from which it has emerged. May I begin with Dr. Debashis?
Well, I will not be Vidya directly responding to your specific question. So I'm taking the liberty of speaking on general principles because I have to leave. And so I'll just sort of look at, if you look at the policy 2020 from a 100 years perspective, if you start with 2047 and go back to 1947, then you realize that there are three inflection points in India. One is 1947 political independence, 1991 economic independence, and 2020, after 34 years, some degree of educational independence from colonial structures that we have inherited for a long time. IIM's IITs, of course, have been pioneers in the film. They have broken the shackles somewhat. However, if you look at the policy, you'll see that fundamentally they're talking about multidisciplinarity, critical thinking, student-centric flexibility of curriculum and pedagogy, and accreditation framework, independent authority to regulate both private and public schools. So this is in sum. So if I take just 4 themes out of this, glean out. 1 is autonomy, 2 is multidisciplinarity, 3 is research and technology-led innovation, and 4 values, mindsets, and culture. If you put them in 4 boxes, you realize that the fundamental aspect of what the policy tries to do, of course, policy is not practice. Please don't get me wrong, because just because it is put in policy doesn't mean it's being practiced. Now I'm looking at 20 years horizon when some of the well-intentioned views of the policy become practice in reality. So if you look at autonomy, for instance, the clamor for autonomy in education practice is a mixed bag of both pretentious idealism and some hard-nosed practicality. I don't see, as an IIM director, any dramatic variation in our autonomy because of the policy. I don't think the policy gives us any more or less autonomy than we had before. The greatest insurance for autonomy is, of course, excellence in student outcome. As long as institutions continue to excel, they will earn their autonomy through social and community and citizen sanction rather than a piece of legislation. However, the law helps. All right. However, institutions and institutional leaders who are trained for blind conformity, and there are many in the system, will find it difficult to exercise autonomy even if the law is on their side. And this is what we find out. Autonomy may be given in law, but it is not exercised in practice. And because fundamentally autonomy is not about the discretion of the director or the chairman, it is a way of life, it is a culture shift where you imbibe autonomy in the institutional culture in the way a teacher chooses a repertoire of pedagogical tools rather than what is sanctioned by the institute, case study method. I don't know, some of my colleagues in the IIM system get very angry when I talk about systemic collapse of indigenous and very brilliant methods of teaching learning. And this is something that autonomy is all about. I think it's a autonomy of thought and self-governance. The Indian word for it is swayattata. And this, I think, is very important. Very quickly, multidisciplinarity is the word, and the NEP is talking about Meru. Meru is multidisciplinary education research universities on the lines of IITs, IIMs. This is the first time that IIMs get mentioned in the NEP. We have not found much of a space there. But the point is that multidisciplinarity has been around for a long time, involving experts from different disciplines working together, each drawing on each other's unique disciplinary knowledge. However, if you look at the COVID world and the post-COVID world, it is not multidisciplinarity per se. It is very difficult to get disciplines together, to get the scientists and the politicians together. So there has to be a transdisciplinary framework. It is not about how you break, in the Western reductionist framework, which we all love to follow, which says that, the whole is a sum of parts, so you must put the parts together. The rishis of India had talked about Purnatva, which is a partless whole. You have to have an intuitive grasp of that whole, and then the parts will follow. And that intuitive grasp of reality is something that is missing from the repertoire of our skill sets, the way we train people, intuition is out of the window because it doesn't even feature in the way we dish out stuff. So I think 2047, when I look back from 2047 until now, I see the reductionist knowledge of the West that explains the whole as a sum of parts will leave space to a quest for something intuitive, the partless whole that Upanishads call Purnatva. So Sayatata and then Purnatva. Third element, research and technology-led innovation. We all know that our schools are involved in knowledge creation, knowledge dissemination, knowledge accreditation, and monetization. Of the four, we have been a little dirty in the knowledge creation process until recently, thanks to a lot of pressure and research, publish or perish kind of research. We are generating some knowledge, but I am not sure if that kind of knowledge is the kind of radical stuff that should come out of the Indian education space. We haven't created a blue ocean strategy yet. Just as we haven't built a Google. Yet we haven't got Intel inside a computer, although we have Indians inside the Intel. But the point is that we haven't been able to brand our kind of knowledge in a way that we should have. I see the Vice Chancellor's office or the Director's office looking a lot more like a tech studio as it is looking now. Technology will not be cosmetic ad, but will serve a pedagogic purpose. Leading schools of the world will harness talent and technology as a strategic synthesis. It cannot just be technology alone. I don't see that. Finally, and I'll end that mercifully because I want to hear both Rishi and Ranjan before I leave, and of course, Anil. By 2047, Indian teachers will have to engage in nurturing global mindsets based on what I understand as three perennial values of India, articulated by India, not of India. One is Satyam, which is authenticity. Second is Nityam, which is sustainability. The third is Purnam, which is wholeness. Mindsets will be based on how learners receive information, not what information they receive. And we see the post-colonial Indian education system that has created mindsets of clerks and coders and imitators to a great extent, will serve a more important civilization need that based on not on material exploitation of nature, but in terms of seeing how will we create a competent and a compassionate human being, a citizen of the world. And I think a teacher's role will be to midwife this transformation through our citizenry. And so this is what I think the primary role of IIMs and IITs would be. IIM Kozhikode has taken a retrospective view, with 2047 being our we have published something around 2047, and we are saying, if we need to be relevant to the world going forward, what must we undo? What must we stop doing right now? And we are undoing systematically in the institutional space a lot of stuff that we were doing so vigorously. And so Rishi would probably know a little bit of those experiments. However, I'd rather keep that to myself. Thank you so much for giving me the time and the opportunity to speak first. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And maybe now move to hear from Dr. Ranjan Banerjee, please.
So thank you, and it was a pleasure to listen to Debashis. I think Debashis, that was sweeping. It covered a lot of ground, and there were many good ideas, good thoughts, many interesting ideas, and I'm broadly aligned with all of what you say. Let me talk about 2-3 things. On the NEP, the NEP is a directional document. One of the directions it talks about is multidisciplinary universities. Another direction it talks about is flexibility, in terms of flexibility to the student, in terms of choices. As an example, if you look at broadly our choices in India when we did our degrees, our choices were more straitjacketed. You went to mechanical engineering, and if you were doing mechanical engineering, 3 years you did courses in mechanical engineering. There were 2 courses in humanities that you had the option to take. So flexibility means that the ability to choose multidisciplinary courses far more liberally, and I think that is potentially a good direction. I think it is really up to us to look at of the NEP and then say, what are the kind of institutions that are relevant and that we want to build and that are in tune with the direction which the NEP is giving. So I think, you want to build institutions that you believe in, which are world-class institutions out of India. And there on world-class, I will pick up on a couple of threads that Debashis said. We talked about autonomy. And I believe the largest issue in autonomy is that most of us are deeply colonized. And by that, what I mean is that the same idea out of the West is valued more than the same idea coming out of India. And ideas are not evaluated based on merit. And when we talk about world class, if our notion of world class is we have to become more like Harvard or we have to become more like Stanford, we will be playing catch up for the rest of our lives. So as an Indian world class institute, you must figure out what it is that the West does well. And my perception is that the West does efficiency well, the West does analysis well. But when it comes to a holistic realization, when it comes to educating the whole human being, there is a lot in Indian wisdom that we can leverage. That is one thought that I would like to leave. The second thought that I would like to leave is when we look at research. I think one of the issues, and there is a lot of strength in the rigor of research that we are taught in the US, that the Western training gives us. But one of the challenges with the rigor of research, and this started with the Carnegie Foundation, is Western research and publication gives a lot of weightage to technical sophistication. So over a period of time, you have created a research paradigm that values rigor over relevance. And a lot of research that you're talking about is written by academics, to be published by academics, and to be read only by academics. And I believe that that is a real opportunity for us, that if you start your research by saying, we will take the rigor from the West, but we will take the problems from India. India has a unique advantage when it comes to research. That is, we have many problems. And we have many problems that are different. We have many problems that are unstructured. And that is why you look at Western researchers, they get their Nobel Prizes by coming here and studying India and doing field experiments. But when will those experiments and when will those studies be led by Indian researchers in problems? So I think we need to set our own research agenda. And I believe that research agenda, and some of it is there in the spirit of the NEP, is basically saying, go out and talk to practitioners, number one, and define management less narrowly. Management is not just what large businesses do. Management is also what small and medium entrepreneurs do. Management is also what the social sector does. Management is also what policy and politics. So management is the art and science of getting things done through people and resources. Now, when you define it this way, everybody needs good management. Are we going out to these different sectors, identify unique problems, and then building research? Now, if the problems that you identify are real world problems, then multidisciplinarity will flow as a consequence. The problem is we have got used to, so let us understand that management itself is a hybrid discipline. Management is a discipline that has its roots in economics, its roots in sociology, it has its roots in multiple disciplines. Secondly, what we call the specializations in management, marketing, finance, operations, information management, these are all artificial boundaries. So actually, there are only business problems or management problems. These are just lenses. And I think to have that ability to look at the problem and use the lens of the problem to illuminate reality, you will find that multidisciplinarity can happen. The third dimension, and maybe I'll stop here, the third thing that is interesting is, let's look at the COVID world, right? And one of the things that COVID world is that we started with a health sector problem. This health sector problem became an economic problem. It became a financial problem. And with the migrant crisis, it became a social problem. And what that should tell us is that no longer can we study economics or the business sector in isolation of other sectors. We are living in an increasingly interconnected world. So when I look at multidisciplinarity, I think rather than use it as a catchphrase, let's talk about what a leader of tomorrow needs to have. What is the orientation that they need to have? What are the soft skills that they need to have? So if you start with your stakeholders and work backwards with a futuristic view and the courage to have original thinking, then you will define multidisciplinarity the right way. Otherwise, we will limit multidisciplinarity to say Western universities are flexible. Let me provide that same level of flexibility within my universities. And that to me is a very narrow frame. So I think the NEP has a great potential. If you're looking to build a great university, great institution, look at the NEP, see what are the synergies that are there with your direction, but build your institution on your own terms and use policy as a guiding light. That would be my quick kind of.
Yes, we've understood that, multidisciplinary has multiple connotations for each of us to take. And I think we should listen to Dr. Rishikesh Krishnan for his perspective on what the NEP holds. and his opening remarks. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Vidya. I think really wonderful exposition by both Debashish and Ranjan. I don't have too much to add in terms of what the NEP has to offer, except to just maybe look back a little and say that in the time since independence, whether it was by design or otherwise, we seem to have done reasonably well in the technical disciplines, so much so that the focus of higher education at least became technical education. And in the process, we sort of neglected or ignored, or whatever you want to call is the right word, the other disciplines. I think one good thing the NEP tries to do is to recover lost ground there, is to sort of emphasize that all those other disciplines that we did not emphasize enough need to be brought back onto the agenda. And that's where I think multidisciplinarity becomes particularly important. I think the challenges of the NEP, as such as they are more in the implementation than the philosophy. I think few people, in fact, this is the one interesting thing about the education policy is that by and large, it didn't attract too much trenchant criticism. And the reason for that is that I think at the philosophical level, it is something which most people on whichever side of the ideological divide you are agree with. But I think the bigger challenge is how do you go about making this happen. For example, the NEP wants to have one multidisciplinary university in each district of India. Now, that seems to be quite a tall order. But yeah, if you could actually do that, that would be indeed be wonderful. So as a goal or an aspiration, I would certainly applaud that choice that the NEP has made. There are other interesting dimensions of the NEP which my colleagues did not speak about. One important dimension of the NEP is the way it has looked at accessibility in a different way. I mean, accessibility used to be primarily based on things like reservations, affirmative action, etc. But this education policy looks at it in two or three new ways. One is by the point I just made that you need to have one of those multidisciplinary universities in each district. Another one is saying, can't you teach in the local language even at the higher education level, which is something which over time we have assumed, particularly in technical education, is neither possible nor desirable. But the NEP has raised fundamental questions about that, which I think is good. And the second interesting way the NEP looks at accessibility is in terms of things like prerequisites, what path or what track you need to follow. It's a little more than just flexibility. I mean, you might be following the recent debate about whether students can go into engineering without doing physics or maths at the +2 level. And there's a pretty vigorous debate going on about that. But I think the fact that this debate is happening is itself a good outcome of the NEP, because it's making us question some of the very rigid assumptions that have dogged the Indian education system for several decades. So I might think the main contribution of the NEP is just opening up new debates, casting away some of the old orthodoxies which seem to have got embedded, and looking at things in a new way. But nonetheless, I would still believe that there are significant challenges ahead in making many of the elements of the NEP work on the ground. Thank you.
Well, that was very
Yeah.
informative to hear so many perspectives for somebody who's not read the NEP in detail. But I think but multifunctionality, multidisciplinarity is something that many universities are attempting to. Uh, I would request the panel to throw some light on how would a student interpret these main aspects of the NEP. What does the NEP hold for a student in general and a management student in particular? So I think if I were to reverse the order of panelists, may I begin with Professor Krishnan, if it's okay by you?
Yeah, for a management student, I'm not sure what exactly the NEP holds out, because as I think my previous speakers mentioned, management by itself doesn't figure too prominently in the NEP document. But if I just look at it at a philosophical level, as I did earlier, I think the notion that we need a bigger exposure or a more substantive exposure to the liberal arts is certainly relevant to management curriculum as well. It would be certainly useful to have our management graduates have more exposure to design, as you're doing at your institution. So these are all good elements to have, and if the NEP facilitates or supports these elements, I think that's something good. What's also emphasized in the NEP, of course, is that accreditation would be the main sort of quality mechanism or the main framework to ensure quality. That's something which might be useful in the management domain as well. If we can get a really rigorous as well as a sort of empathetic accreditation system in place. I say empathetic because I think the accreditation processes also have to allow individuality. They also have to allow experimentation. They have to encourage institutions which take a slightly different track. So I'm hoping all of that will happen. But short answer to your question is, I think my hope is that the new education policy will allow management education to be less straitjacketed than it has been so far, to be genuinely multidisciplinary, at least in its foundations, to promote, to very different kind of thinking among our management graduates. I'm really hoping it can do all that, and hopefully our students, if not the ones already doing management, but at least the ones who will enter management institutions in the years ahead, will be able to benefit from this.
Sure, that I think is a good omen for the students, because they will be learning multiple things while management remains in the pivot part. So, Professor Debashis, you would like to share some light, if possible?
Ranjan has to come before me, but I will take the liberty.
No, he's only there for half an hour and he's not well, so I'm happy to sit down.
All right. So I just, I thought if you look at our attempt to figure out what happens in term 5 and 6 to an IIM graduate and what happens to the teachers who go to those classes, it's the most demoralizing experience that a teacher has. Term 5, 6 students are placed, and so they have absolutely zero interest in sitting in class. If they're there for attendance and they're not present, they're attending, they're not present. So I thought, it would be a good idea to look at delight as a component. It's not just about multidisciplinarity. It's about looking at learning essentially a delightful, Ananda is gone out of the window when we technicize management or whatever it is that we teach here, to a point where the rasa is gone. And so you have to bring back Ananda into the classroom. And if it is not there, then you have to have the structural and the architectural sort of wherewithals to make this happen. So we floated a course called Liberal Studies in Management in the MBA program, and we were hoping we'll get some good students. This year, the second year, we got 139,000 applications for 50 people that we'll take in. And there's a scramble that we never anticipated would be there. Why 139,000? Because everybody who's applied for the PGP program also wants to have a look at the liberal studies program, because their summer placements has been just as good. That's the barometer of whether they want to come into a program or not. And so they were wondering if liberal studies will fetch jobs, but it is in fact our summer interns, and then the quality of placements that has happened is dramatic. So the industry is looking for it too. So I would tell you that I just finished before this, because I just finished teaching a class on Gandhian leadership, and we are talking about conflict resolution involving Gandhian framework. We also have a program called, in fact, a whole course called Narratives of Wisdom, NOW, which I just started to rethink. So we're taking some of the wisest people on this planet since civilization began, and is inferring that they will have something to say about some of the challenges these students will face, dilemmas they'll face in their lives. And I can tell you, these are the classes that are attended with absolute, not everybody would like to attend such courses, but those who come, they stay there. I mean, stay on, and it doesn't matter. My course is being offered on term 6, and I can tell you that the students who have enrolled will not leave the room. It will be like edge of the seat kind of thing. The reason I'm telling you this is there is a body of students that have begun to realize the futility of trying to do what the machine can do well anyway. And so it is possible that the analytical, the threadbare issues which comes into a cause-effect relationship, anything that can be broken into that framework of cause and effect will be done by a high-speed machine somewhere. And so it's better that you know why, what cause and what effect you want to unleash. So the whys of the world are going to be very critical. And I think students are beginning to grasp that a lot more than they did ever before. And some of our courses that does not necessarily follow from MEP. When we started the liberal arts program, NEP was not in my mind, although I was asked once in a while to give my inputs when the policy was being drafted. But I can tell you that it did not occur to me that NEP will come up with such a suggestion, but we did it pretty early, and I'm sure Rishi is looking at that as an undergrad program, and I'm pretty certain other IIMs are giving it a thought. Ranjan sort of specializes in design thinking. I asked him to come and teach. Well, I was DG in Delhi. I don't mind learning from those who do it better and have done it earlier than me, but I believe design is going to be a very critical component. And so I leave that to Ranjan to decide what he has to say on that. I would rest my voice a little bit. Go ahead, Ranjan.
Yes, so Professor Banerjee, your turn.
So, I think one, it's very good to listen to these panels because I always come back with new perspectives. So I have a fairly unique opportunity as head of Bitsom, which is trying to build a world-class institute from scratch with the backing of Bits Pilani and with a lot of resourcing in Mumbai. And one of the things that I always felt, and I think Rishi and Debashis have tackled it in their own way, that when you're trying to build curriculum relevance in an established institute, you're trying to change the wheels on a running train. And a lot of our curriculum today has been what I would say purposed for the industrial organization, which is, your manufacturing, finance. You see these all as silos and functions. So we have the opportunity to purpose a curriculum for the digital organization of tomorrow from the start, number one. Number two, to build in this strong integration, and integration in terms of hard skills and soft skills, in terms of a liberal arts curriculum and the expansion of perspective. So this is a nice opportunity, and I'm enjoying that part of it. But I think the original question was, what would you say to the student? And I think there are 2 or 3 answers, and all of them on it. So I would also say this, Debashis, I would love teaching. When I was a visiting faculty before I went to SPJMR, I insisted on teaching after placements, because the first class, they would come in, they would not want to be there. But at the end of the first class, the class size would expand, because suddenly you are asking them more existential questions and asking them to really look at life. Because the reality of this is, too many people who come into an MBA see the MBA as getting the first job. The reality is that most MBA students will have 4 to 5 distinct careers over the course of a lifetime. Very few people who join a Unilever will want to end up as the CEO of Unilever. So we need to do more than prepare them for the first job. We need to prepare them for life. In the process, one of the things we need to tell them is that how do you ignite curiosity in every classroom? Mr. Gopal Krishnan, whom I wrote my book with, we had this argument saying what proportion of teaching should be about teaching subject and what proportion about teaching should be about building curiosity in each and every class. And my sense is that in our business schools, even if we can get to 40% igniting curiosity and 60% teaching the subject, we will have made a significant leap forward. In most cases, we are at 80-20 or 90-10. A part of this lies with the faculty, a part of this lies with, because most students, when they come into school, the courses that are popular, and all of us know this, right? Finance courses are popular. Quant courses are popular. Marketing courses are popular because those are perceived to be relevant. I think one of the things you need to get out of the way is this: the student is not a judge of relevance. If you ask the student to judge relevance, they are judging it superficially as per a job profile. You need to teach them to learn how to learn, to teach them to ask questions, to see the linkages between business and society. So, one of the things I'm very strong on, I do not believe in this metaphor of student as a customer whom you have to give a student as what you want. The metaphor that is better is you are the parent to that student. You have to act in the best interests of the student, even if in the short term it makes you unpopular. To the student, I will say this: campus with your curiosity alive. You do not really know what you want to do. See the MBA as an exploration of yourself and not as a journey to McKinsey Unilever. And that is our job as teachers. And I believe a larger part of our job as teachers, one is we need to provide the flexibility, but we need to have small group conversations with students outside the classroom so that they can explore themselves fully. And I believe that this is an underrated aspect of business school teaching, that we have become what I will call transactional. We teach our courses, do our grades, and get it. It is the spending time with students in groups of 5 and groups of 10 and having open-ended questions, open-ended conversations, that will create the leaders of tomorrow, because they must ask the question. Do your students want to be ethical? Of course they do. Do your students want to understand them better, themselves better? Of course they do. Do they have the confidence that it is possible to do this and succeed? I don't know. So it is up to us to role model outside the classroom. It is up to us to create an environment where questions, uncomfortable questions, can be asked in small groups. So I think the focus on curiosity and developing the whole human being, often these become cliches. How do you, and one of the things I personally believe in, everybody in this panel fortunately is an example of this. Throughout my career, Rishi and Debashish, I always saw deans and directors as people who saw first at the inauguration and second at the convocation. Now, my personal belief is that I am a teaching dean. I am approachable, because if you set the example for faculty-student connect as the head of an institute, you create a culture. Culture building in academic institutions has not got enough emphasis. And so I've given you a long answer, but to the student, my answer is this: value the flexibility and be comfortable with the fact that very often you don't know what to do. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know where you're going. Ask yourself those difficult questions. You will have greater clarity of purpose. You will become a better leader. Confusion is a necessary precursor to clarity. Okay.
Very good.
That was so wonderful.
Vidya,
Yes,
if I may ask,
Anil,
if I may ask questions.
Please, Anil.
The whole purpose of education is to ultimately help people to know themselves better and to understand what is their work in this world. And the whole purpose of business is to take responsibility for the way we live now. So the question I have for you is, this new education policy, in what way would it ignite that genius in each person? And what can we in management do to help our students to learn how to use business as a platform for taking responsibility for the way we live now? For instance, if there is a farmer agitation going on right now, what is it that the role of business is currently? And if we have the more conscious students whom we are developing and they are in organizations today, what is their role in this present time? If they have this whole controversy about Ashoka University, which is being talked about in one way or the other, what is it that we are teaching to our students, which is making them take responsibility to engage in this discourse, which is to make the country better? So I'm saying that, are we going to be just observers, or are we going to be actors in the universe? And how are we preparing our students for that? I'm curious to look at your comment. Debashish, you and Rishi and Ranjan. Debashish, what's your...
Since I wanted to hear you until I stayed back, the thing is that the intangibles of education that were thought of as beyond the purview of the formal academic processes are the most subscribed aspects of IIM. If you look at across the IIM spectrum, all finance marketing stays where they are. I mean, they are because job demand. But if you look at the intangibles, for instance, there's a course, there's a professor in IIM Kozhikode who teaches a course called Social Transformation of India. And he starts the lecture with, if you were recruiting a candidate who was dark in color, who was Muslim, who was a woman, and who came from a certain category in the economic space, lower order category, would you automatically pick that person up as equal to everybody else? And the answer would be silent but a resounding no. And so I thought those teachers who can shift the mindsets of students to be a little more compassionate with themselves and others in the process are the ones that stay with students much longer. They may have been hard taskmasters, but I can tell you from my years of experience, S.K. Chakraborty in IIM Calcutta, that's where I started learning lessons in management, to wherever you went, you realize that compassion stays because compassion is action. I have not seen a teacher who succeeded with students unless he or she brought a degree of compassion to where students were. They were not from where they were rather than where the students were, and were able to pull them up from where they were. So the insensitivity to a farmer who's hungry outside is largely because we have created a bubble of our own, technical bubble, that says that we can sanitize the rest of the country from our classroom and we can go on our business of teaching, learning, getting a job. But fundamentally, it doesn't happen. So, for instance, in our institution, we have what you call a project where our students are asked to go to Wayanad and figure a way out. I myself went and spent a day in Dharavi with $50 to see what kind of challenges $50 a day. So I told students, if you were to sort of really live in those circumstances, what would you have? See, they will have first and foremost a deep sensitivity, awareness of who they were as they were co-opted by a set of beliefs and assumptions which were not necessarily true. And so if they could expand their definition of who they were, and if a teacher enabled them to do that in the classroom context with a bit of a reflection. The problem with our curriculum is that there's too much of action going on there. Case study method is slightly better, but too much of data and action and information and too little by way of reflection. So I tell my students that if there was no Krishna, there would be no Arjuna. If there was no Aristotle, there would be. If there was no Aristotle, there would be no Alexander. If there was no Chanakya, there would be no Chandragupta. So your teachers will reflect back to you what you essentially are. This is fundamental in teaching learning. And I think all our teachers are asked in direct or indirect way to emulate those who actually bring that extraordinary compassion and reflection to their classroom repertoire of skills. This is what is the most critical, I think, teaching learning value as I see it in my modest. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Ranjan and Rishi.
So, I thought your question was about how do you create business leaders who are better citizens, who are thinking about issues, who are making the world a better place. And I think there are multiple dimensions to this. One is the dimension of teaching the connections to society. One is the dimension of exposing them to the societal impact of business decisions, exposing them to SDGs, not in a very preachy way, but in, just understanding the linkage. And one of the things we have found, Anil, is that history plays a very good role. If you look at the history of the corporation, what was the purpose of the corporation started? How has it evolved? So I think just a more refined understanding of business and its connection to society, I think is clearly one. Second is the exposure to hard and soft subjects and questioning of the kind that Debashis was talking about. I think that is very useful, that if you make students think about some of these issues. But I will go third and fourth. And then my third and fourth is that beyond the point, you cannot teach students values in the classroom. So I believe that one of the bigger things is how do you curate experiences that expose them to different things, that expose them to unstructured environments. So curation and reflection of relevant experiences, which allow students to appreciate India in its totality, I think is very, very important. Whether it be a social sector project, whether it be a visit, and typically a one-day visit to Dharavi is not what I would recommend. I would recommend something a little bit deeper, because we have to distinguish between a deep understanding of other people's constraints and an empathy, and what I can just best describe as poverty tourism. And I think poverty tourism is a bad thing. When you send rich kids or wannabe rich kids into impoverished environments and say, look, see how it's different, as opposed to, can you learn to see the world through the eyes of a different other? Can you develop genuine empathy? So I think that part of it is by curating experiences. The fourth part, which I will talk about, and this is something I am passionate about, is that how do you teach people ethics? And I think one of the way you teach people ethics is which is a different thing which we did at my previous institute, and I will bring in here also, is get in leaders from different walks of life and get young people to question them about dilemmas, question them about the situations they face. And our young people need the perspective that there are people who are successful in public life, but who have lived a good life, who are good people. That that it is possible to be the kind of human being you want to be and still cut it in the larger so-called cutthroat, selfish world. So I think that is the second piece. The third piece in our MBA is we should ask ourselves, I believe the world is, if you look at the situations that are available in the world, 80% of the situations are amenable to a collaborative approach. 20% are amenable to a competitive approach. If you look at the bulk of our education system, it stresses competition more than collaboration. How do we, within our education system, build group work and systems such that it is more viable and more profitable to collaborate, such that we are creating good team players on day one? Secondly, when we look at, Anil, something like diversity, it is important for people to realize that this idea of ranking 4 people by one single CAT score or GMAT score, etc., the moment you're looking at a team to solve a problem that requires disparate skills, ranking on capability or a single metric can actually have the wrong purpose. Because if you have 4 people who get 98, 95, 96, and 94, and all of them get the same 94 right, then their cumulative ability to solve a problem is only as good as the highest member. So what is the divergence in a team in terms of being able to bring perspective that other people cannot? And the role of that in collaborative environments, I don't know how well it is understood and preached. So I've covered a range of grounds, but I think one needs to think about this. And I would still go back, Anil, and say all of this that I've talked about, when I say experiential learning, when I say reflection, when I say liberal arts courses, all of this must be supplemented with small group conversation between faculty and students outside the classroom. That's
Wonderful.
changing minds.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Rishi.
Yeah, so I think both Debashish and Ranjan have said so much. I don't really have too much to say, except that, again, I find that there's a sort of gap between philosophy and practice. I have absolutely no disagreement with what either of them said, but I must confess that I struggle to implement any of these ideas on the ground. In our institutes, we have over the years scaled up quite a bit. So for example, in IMB, now we take 525 students a year. In Indore, where I was earlier, we were graduating more than 600 students a year. Now, all these nice ideas work quite well when we had 180 students in the MBA program. And when it was possible to maybe have 10 groups of 20 people each, and you could have all these close interactions. Now with 500, 600 students, I really struggle in how to implement these. So I think one of the reasons we tend to become transactional, the term that was used some time ago, more technique oriented and so on, is simply because we haven't figured out. I don't know, maybe technology can enable it. Maybe there are other ways of doing it, but frankly, I'm really just struggling in how do we have all these close interactions with students. And I completely agree. I mean, when I was at Indore, I made it a point to interact quite a bit with the students. I sometimes even interfered in their activities, which as a director, maybe I shouldn't have done. But I interfered largely with the objective of raising many of the questions that Ranjan and Debashish alluded to make them think about bigger questions and all the rest. And I think at the end, they appreciated that, though initially they might have been quite reluctant to allow that to happen. But I'm just wondering, how do we really make this happen across institutions? And it's not only about the values of the students, it's also about values of faculty. I mean, we today have a fairly large faculty body. We have 110 faculty in IIM Bangalore. How do I bring any kind of value congruence among this faculty body? We, on the one hand, are trying to pursue all these fancy global rankings with their emphasis on research in FT50 journals. And if that is what you are pursuing, and that's the criterion you use to choose a faculty member, it is quite possible that that faculty member would not be very interested in many of the issues that Anil you raised, or my two colleagues just spoke about. So, if I really press them hard to get into all this, they'll say, fine, we'll do all that, but then don't ask me for the FT papers next year or whatever it is. So,
yeah, that's quite a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, so there are just a tremendous number of conflicts. And I think we have over the years given up some of the debate and discussion. I remember when I was a student at Ahmedabad, we did a course with Anil Gupta on Indian social and political environment. It was a very unstructured course. Every session, Anil would come and just raise a new question, and the discussion would go all over the place. By the end of the year, some of our colleagues actually decided to give up their high-paying corporate careers and instead work in the social sector. I know 3 or 4 of them from our batch, they stuck at it. I remember very memorable things like that. We do still have things like that, but the number of students who really go down that path is the same 3 or 4. But now if it's out of 500 or 600, then it was out of 200 or something. So perhaps proportionality is not really working.
One thing that I'd like to invite you for, we recently launched a new initiative called the Future of Capitalism course, which I serve on the global board of Shizuken University in Japan. So along with IIM Business School, Shizuken University, and FGV in Brazil, it's a digital offering of students from all the 4 campuses, where we are having unusual conversations by curating the experiences, all digital. Like we were in Brazil, at Brasilia, we were with the vice president of Brazil having a dialogue with the students. He's a former general who has an interesting thing. We had the Citibank CEO interacting with this company, with this group of students. We had the Vatican, the advisor to the Pope, and he was in the program. So what I would like to very much do is, I think this is something that we need to join hands on, and I'll also be writing separately to you how we can curate something together for our students, so that our faculty and students can create this virtuous network together to say, how do we begin to ask new questions? Of course, none of us have all the answers, but that might be an attempt to do so. So rather than only have exchange and collaboration with international schools, it might be time that some of us who want to make a difference in this country, we join hands and begin some exchange and collaboration of this kind, which might be quite fascinating amongst us. Yes. I think from the audience, there is one person, Vidya, who's asked a question, but this is something about the 5-year integrated course. So Rishi, you may want to answer. Is that something akin to what happened in engineering, but you did it in IIM Indore? Do you want to answer to that?
Yeah, I must confess, I didn't understand the question too well.
The 5 years integrated program in management.
Yeah, no, I saw that. I don't know what exactly the question is, but anyway, let me just put it in the context of today's discussion. I think given that we are looking at the NEP and what it holds for the country and so on, I think the 5-year integrated program we tried to create at Indore is very much in tune with what the NEP is trying to do. Essentially, it's trying to build on the foundations of a liberal education in the first 3 years, and then bring in some of the specialized business and management skills in the 4th and 5th year, so that the student graduating from that comes out with many of the sort of leadership oriented perspectives that both Ranjan and Debashis spoke about. So yeah, I think in a well-designed 5-year integrated program that would happen. But let me also just tell you that making the 5-year program work well is again a big challenge. You've got to you need the right faculty in the first 3 years. You need to design your curriculum in the first 3 years very well. There's a temptation to just, do a lot of management courses in the first 3 years. You have to just eschew that temptation. And many other things you were talking about, Ranjan and Anil, just spending a lot of time with the students to inculcate that, way of thinking and so on. So in its ideal form, it's very well aligned with the NEP, but difficult and challenging to make it work.
Yeah. Vidya, back to you.
Okay, Anil, thanks. So I've been having this question on top of my mind as a teacher, and a faculty, and now trying to put together things in the role of a director. I've been hearing all of you say this. We as faculty are caught in this dilemma between wanting to do multifunctional beyond the classroom, engage with the student at personal level to see that they do things differently and so on, and NEP on one side, and what we want to be ourselves on the other side, and the dilemma of the numbers, as Professor Krishnan was indicating, what do we have to achieve. So as a faculty, where are we, especially with this NEP thing? What should be our priorities? Of course, there is a personal way of aligning your priorities, but I'm just wondering, is there a directive on how should the priorities be aligned? So if I could ask Professor Ranjan to go first on this.
I'm just trying to find a systemic answer, and I don't know, because I was listening to Rishi, and I think the honesty of his answer is very important. We need to have that kind of honesty. Rishi, I've been lucky. My MBA school the previous organization had 240 students, and I made it a point to keep it at 240 despite a lot of temptation. I'm getting into a new school with 120 as a batch size, but you are right that there is this larger thing to expand. My suggestion on that one, and then Vidya, I'll come to your question. My suggestion on that one is we'll have to figure out a way to do it. But at least I have taken this stance in every institute I have been a part of as a leader. That is to say, I will not recruit a researcher who does not care about teaching well. I just will not do it, because I think it is a diversion of culture and it dilutes the culture. So, and I think it is possible that if you have teachers who care and who care about issues, and this is an unproven hypothesis, Rishi, because I've never been long enough doing it, is that if you create the environment where you import the rigor from top US faculty, you get faculty who care about real issues, you create industry linkages, you will get publications at the top journals. It will just not happen in 5 years. It will take 7 to 8 years for that to happen. But you will get publications because the questions you are asking are distinctive. A lot of the publication problem is that because everybody is trying to publish, you get imitative and incremental questions. So basically, I'm an idealist. I still want to believe that we should run institutions we believe in and let the other things happen. I've not been proved disastrously wrong yet. Okay, I've been proved wrong from time to time, but not disastrously wrong. So that is one question. But my answer to you, Vidya, is why did you become a faculty in the first place? Did you become a faculty to conform to somebody else's numbers? Then work for the corporate sector and make more money. You get paid much more. It is economically irrational to be an academic if what you want to do is conform to. So the reason you got into academics was to make a difference to the lives of people and to change the way people think. We must never lose sight of that passion in the way we run our institutions, in the way we communicate to our people. And I think it is possible. In an IIM Bangalore, I'm sure Rishi can identify 10 faculty members who publish well, teach well, and connect with students. It may not be the rule. It may be the exception today, but there are 10. And maybe those 10 are among the 5 faculty whom students will remember 10 years later. So I think we will need to hire for attitude much more strongly. We will need to not let metrics determine the kind of institutions we build. And we will need to have the conviction that if we build the institutions we want to build, with a few tweaks here and there, okay? There are tweaks here and there. It's not completely in the sky. You can do both. It is possible. It is possible. That's what I think. I could be proved dramatically wrong in the next 7 to 8 years, because I do realize that the imperative on all of us is to scale up the number of students. So anybody who's running an institution today, the NEP also specifies that. The NEP is saying 5 to 10 years, 5,000 students, something like that, Rishi?
Yeah.
5 to 10 years, 5,000 students. So you will have to figure out ways to do it. One of the ways I think is that if you can get your faculty committed to the student, then you will have to get alumni and industry also committed to spending that out of classroom time. So you'll have to think about it. And I think one way of thinking about it is that if you look at coaching, for instance, coaching is a very interesting industry because the coaching industry is largely a remote industry. It's largely done online. Nobody says, "Oh, why can't you meet me?" So I think if you can line up 500 people who are willing to give 4 hours a year to look at the welfare of the student, and out of those 500, 100 are your faculty, then it is possible. I think we have to tweak this around to say this is something we have to do. If we had to do it, how do we do it? And what are the limiting assumptions that are preventing us from doing it? I haven't worked out the answer. I'm just giving you something off the cuff as a direction, but I think it is possible. And I think it starts by saying that if you make this a constraint, saying the job of the faculty involves 12 hours a year of small group time with students or 24 hours, and you make that a constraint. And then you design other things keeping that constraint. So the real question is, in your actual behavior as a leader, what are you really saying is the most important thing in your institute? Okay, and I think once we figure that out, then everything else will kind of follow. It's very difficult to do. I know I'm sounding idealistic. One does it incrementally, but I've had some success to the point of 20 to 30%. And 20 to 30% is the success I've had, but 20 to 30% is progress to my mind. Okay. But we must also always have the honesty that Rishi just said. These problems are real. None of us have easy answers. We have to work through them. But my answer to the faculty is just simply this. Teaching is a calling. It's not a function where you're responding to 3 publications at the end of the year and 8.5 feedback at the end of the year. Don't let metrics dilute the reason you got into the profession in the first place.
Those are very powerful words, and we should take a lot of strength from that, I feel, because I think every academic in today's setup is grappling with this real issue of where do I align myself. Professor Krishnan, from your side, I know you said this earlier, but is there a way that you want to clarify?
In all this, Vidya, I must confess I have now lost track of your question. So would you just repeat the
Right.
question?
So my question is, me as an academic, earlier you said that, there are these compulsions of publications, there are these compulsions of doing multifunctional things. And I, as an academic, and I, in the sense, I speak for all the people that I know as academics, we all wish we spend a lot more time with students. We read, we think, we become more wiser, if I can use that word for lots of other words. We are able to engage in conversations. We are able to do things that make it richer for us to understand and view the world. Are we compelled both by policy and by the dilemma of building the profession in today's world that we need to fulfill certain matrices, both in terms of publications or in terms of hours of teaching? Is the NEP also indicating something on these?
Okay. I don't know what the NEP is specifically saying that, though I think, as I mentioned earlier, it leaves the question of quality largely to the accreditation process, though it, of course, emphasizes quality quite a bit. It does put a strong emphasis on research. So given that strong emphasis on research, it is, I guess, reasonable to assume that research will be one of the important criteria, both for assessment of institutions and of individuals. I think the challenge here is for faculty members and academics to see themselves as what some of my friends called as an engaged scholar. What an engaged scholar is somebody who is engaged in multiple ways, is engaged in, of course, pushing the boundaries of knowledge, is engaged in asking the new and right questions, is engaged with different stakeholders, including industry, is engaged, of course, with students. So I would argue that maybe one has to go beyond this self-image as of either being a researcher or a teacher, and seeing oneself in all these multiple dimensions. And I hope our institutional assessment processes will also have the maturity to sort of, align with these expectations. Obviously, be too much to expect somebody to excel in everything, but obviously we at the same time we do want people to excel in at least one or two of these dimensions and be reasonably good in the others as well. And I agree with, just going back to the point that Anil was mentioning earlier. I think there are a lot of interesting opportunities. I was just when I was listening to him, I was thinking, we did a wonderful discussion with Michael Sandel a few months ago, based on his new book, The Tyranny of Merit. And it's interesting, just one of our faculty members just liked the book, just wrote him a mail, and Michael responded. And then my colleague, Professor Sriram, said, would you be willing to talk to our students? And Michael, I don't know, maybe it was a good day for us. He just said, yeah, why not? And then one thing led to another. And then we had this wonderful discussion, which was largely driven by our students, where Michael Sandel spent about an hour with us talking about all those big issues in his book. So I think there are opportunities, but, as faculty, we have to, just step out and take those opportunities.
Thank you, professors. I don't see Professor Chatterjee, since he has left the meeting. Okay.
Yeah, for the benefit of the audience, it may be worthwhile to share that Debashish is not feeling well. Some of his family members have got impacted by COVID, and we just need to respect, and he's looking after his health. But it was very gracious of him to come and spend almost 40 minutes with us. So I just want to thank Debashish for that. But Vidya, please go ahead and ask. And from the audience who are listening, if there's anything that you want to offer as a question, do please ask. There is still a few minutes left in this webinar, and do ask your questions. And Vidya, please go ahead.
Yes, so I was just trying to understand from a different perspective now. If we were to look it upside down, conventionally Indian education has been multifunctional. As Professor Debashish opened also in his remarks, saying we've had many things that went on in our, ancient civilization-based education systems. Why suddenly do we have this need? Have we lost track, or people like us at SOBD who have, an idea that we need to integrate many things? And we also heard Professor Debashish say that he is doing liberal studies. Do we need to study these by direction, or is it something that our system of education is driving us to something where we are losing out on education per se in the spite for qualification? How does a faculty and how does a student educate in this given scenario? We are flooded with technology, we are flooded with diversion, as we may say, and now we are flooded with anxiety of COVID and related issues. And is this policy telling us as to it is natural for us to be multifunctional? Have we somewhere come out of that nature that we have been in and come to silos, and now do we have a specific attempt to go back into the natural way of looking at the world around us from, a natural lens? So I'm just asking, what does it mean? Why do we have a policy to tell us that you need to do multifunctional things? Have we lost something that we were originally born with, and are we now trying to trace it back? What's it? It's a curiosity that I've had. Professor Banerjee?
So, I was thinking about the question as you were asking it. I don't think siloization is a problem that is restricted to our country. It is probably something that is worldwide, that we classify the world in order to study it. Over a period of time, those classifications grow stronger in our mind, that they become the lens through which we view the world. I mean, as a simple example, there is no physics problem or chemistry problem or biology problem. There are just phenomena in nature. Similarly, there is no finance marketing problem. There are just business problems or management problems. So we classify the world, and then we internalize our own classifications. Somebody like Anil, who teaches creativity, this class classification system helps us to make sense on a day-to-day basis, but is the biggest barrier to creativity. And a child has fewer barriers because the child has fewer classification systems. Having said that, in India, I suspect the problem has related to, and that's why you're seeing the resurgence, has related to the middle class child's need for economic security. Growing up in the 1980s in what was still a very, educationally liberal family, it was not that my dad ever told me you should go to an IIT. But if you were a good student in science, the peer pressure was that you really had two vocations to choose from. You could either become a doctor or you could become an engineer. This was dictated by peer pressure and by the middle class perception of what would give you economic security. Today, the number of careers and vocations has expanded. The nature of linkages across has expanded. And therefore, I think the risk taking is going up as well as the options have gone up. But yes, did we lose our way? I think we did. I think we did. I think we went too far around the technical route. I think we went too far around the analytical route. And then we had, and this is, I think, true of MBA programs, that a significant proportion of the engineers who come into MBA programs, and Rishi, we are in the business of telling truth, you started it, so I'm expanding on this, are engineers who are looking to forget their engineering. They're coming to MBA program because they want to study anything other than engineering. Okay, so it's not their fault. It is that we still have structures which are orienting people towards safety at a larger level. I'd go one step further with that. I think it's criminal that today we have venture capital for JEE coaching classes, where the coaching class has become a huge business. Now, what if I'm a child who can't afford a coaching class? How is that inclusive? Right? So I think we have gone wrong, and I think we are trying to correct. Having said that, I'm not sure if, I think the emphasis on the multidisciplinary university is good, but there must be alternative paths also. If I'm a standalone master's university institution, I can be multidisciplinary without having an undergraduate program. So I think some of those routes are now being suggested where you talk about cluster universities and things like that. So there are some modifications that need to be done, but the spirit of multidisciplinarity, of curiosity, of flexibility, these are good directions. Because what you don't want is to create people who are financially successful but completely not at peace with themselves, because they haven't really found things they want to do, but they are in a material cage where they cannot get go of their trappings or their CTC. So they're not enjoying themselves, but they're doing conventionally well and they stay in that cage. And that is something we want to avoid by giving people more options, letting them make better choices, having reflection at a younger age. So all of these things are very good directions. Have we gone wrong somewhere? I think we have a little bit.
I think it's good time for us to course correct, and we are trying that, I feel. So, Professor Krishnan, your take, please.
Yeah, I'll just pretty much pass. I think Ranjan gave a good answer. I'll only answer one thing which you asked, which is that, I think there has been some decline. If you don't like the word decline, you can say some rigidization over time. If I just think back to the time when I joined IIT as a student, early 1980s, I must say that quite a few of my classmates who are pretty well-read, they really, I thought I was quite well educated in school, but there were several of them who, really read a lot of interesting stuff way beyond what I had done. I remember some of the quizzes I attended when I joined the first year in IIT. The quality of quizzing was amazing. So, there were really some very brilliant people there, and they had obviously benefited a lot from the schooling they had gone through. And I think at that time, people were not spending so much time on coaching. There was coaching even then, but I do remember that even for JEE, we put in a few months of effort. It's not as though we spent 3 years, 4 years, 5 years preparing for JEE. Nobody went to Kota and camped there and things like that. So I think there was some balance. We did a lot of other stuff, dramatics, debate and all that. Somewhere in 11th, we got serious about all this JEE stuff and all that. Maybe in 12th, we put in some effort and we got through. But I think certainly it's gone too far now, and there's certainly need for course correction. No doubt about that.
Okay. So thank you for those inputs. I am reading a few questions that I see on the chat. What I see is there are so many private institutions, and the NEP also encourages a lot more institutions without classifying private public. Does it become too commercialized, and will it have an impact on the standard or quality of education? So whoever among you wants to take.
I think Rishi spoke about the role of accreditation, right?
Right.
So as long as you can put in the quality standards, and as long as education does not become too commercial in activity, and that is where some role of regulation as well as some larger role of how can we get people who are entering academia for the right reasons. That's an idealistic answer. The threat is very real. Threat is very real. But the real answer is, what is your regulatory framework? What is your quality framework? And if accreditation, and that is where accreditation, I think, can play a positive role. Because one of the things that I believe about accreditation is, how do you build accreditations while allowing for uniqueness and innovation in the institution? And one of the things that I have seen with the global accreditation with ASCSB is that you can be a slightly different institute, and if you can explain their mission, your mission and vision to them, then you can innovate within your mission vision and still be accredited. So I think that framework of accreditation, if it enables quality but enables innovation, striking that balance, and this is an executional issue. It's a very
Right.
to get completely right.
So, Professor Krishnan, you would like to add something on the accreditation bit?
I'll just add one point. The point is that I think we need the right private people setting up institutions for the right reasons. So that's where the regulatory framework and everything plays a very important role. We did see a huge expansion in engineering education starting somewhere in the 80s, late 80s, 90s, and so on. It certainly enabled provision of engineering education that the state would not have been able to deliver. So let's face it, that private education has played an important role. But one challenge we saw in the past was that the regulatory bureaucracy and the regulatory requirements were such that it really kept out a lot of genuine education entrepreneurs who had the good of society at heart and who really wanted to set up good institutions. One thing I'm hoping the new integrated regulator and all the regulatory guidelines that go along with the regulator, what I'm hoping is that these will encourage and allow the right private entrepreneurs and the right private educationists to come in and set up institutions. That's extremely important. If that happens, then we might see private education not being sort of the hub of commercialization, but actually being the hub of a renaissance in higher education.
Thank you, sir, on that. And one last question before we go for the final round. What is it for the education scenario that industry practitioners should come into this space? How important as well as lucrative, if I can use that word, because there is a big dive that the person is taking. How is it encouraging for an industry practitioner to come into the field of academics? This is the question that I'm seeing on the box. So your answers, please.
Yeah, I'll take that first. I think obviously there's a great need for connect with what's happening in the world of practice. And all of us recognize that, and we would love to have more people with deep industry experience as part of our faculty. I'm sure Ranjan will tell you more. I think SP Jain has done a wonderful job in that area, in nurturing those connections and links and so on. But even in the IITs and IIMs, I think in the last few years, we have seen many efforts. For example, IIT Madras, which has been doing extremely well in Industry Connect, has a very good number of professors of practice who have come in from industry, and they are driving a lot of the industrial consultancy activity, the startup activity, the IIT Madras Research Park, many of the initiatives which have enabled IIT Madras to be quite distinct in its outcomes as far as industry-oriented work is concerned. So I think there is a huge role for industry practitioners. But I mean, there is, of course, change that has to happen on both sides. I think we need to understand how to bring industry practitioners into our institutions. The industry practitioners also need to understand how can they contribute better to the institution. I mean, though, see, on the one hand, there's this question of the reduction in their income, but sometimes there's also a feeling among some practitioners that, okay, this is an easy activity and it's a noble and easy activity, and we can kind of just be in the educational institution and, hang up our boots and, just tell a few war stories, and that's all we have to do. So I think we have to guard against that as well.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Banerjee.
Yeah, I think this has been a remarkable conversation, and I just want to thank Debashish, who's not here, and Ranjan, you, and Rishi. What I'm taking out of this conversation is that there are 5 things that struck me as particularly important here. And these 5 things that I'm taking out are: 1, curiosity, that we all began by saying that we have to take responsibility for igniting that sort of curiosity in people. We talked about learning how to learn. We talked about different ways of looking at it. But curiosity is such an important part of this whole conversation that we are in. The second thing we talked about is that we need to do more experiments in education. We need to convene the right people around the right questions. And those experiments, which many of you are very boldly doing, with Debashish doing these experiments on bringing Indian spiritual thought into the classroom. Some of us have been, from a very early childhood, for us that has been the main source of wisdom, and bringing that and asking questions that what does India have to offer in addition to that Western model of education? What is it that India wants to offer? The third dimension that we talked about is that when we talk about this whole aspect about the systems thinking and the importance of design thinking, where we begin to tell our students about taking responsibility for the way we live now and more responsible business, I think Ranjan pointed something quite very, very fascinating when he said that, irrespective of the stimulation that you do in these classrooms, the dialogue that really happens in small groups with the faculty, where the faculty and the students are forming a learning community and having dialogue, and they're more vulnerable, and they're talking about both their deepest aspirations but also their worst fears, and having an honest dialogue about it. I think that's where people really grow, and how nice it would be to create both the space and the time for this dialogue. And Rishi reminded us that he is very inspired by such ideas, but he said, when we tend to become large and there is this large group of students with a large amount of faculty, and he raised some hope there by saying maybe technology has an answer. And he himself answered it by saying he was an amazing author who just published a fantastic book, and the faculty member reached out, and lo and behold, the person said, I'm here to dialogue with the students. And spontaneously, a wonderful learning opportunity presented itself. And he gave hope to say, maybe we need to collaborate. We need to share these resources with each other. The fourth aspect that, you said, and all of you implied that, and I know that because I invited the 3 of you, when Vidya asked, Anil, can you invite some unusual people? And I reached out to 3 of you. I mean, I could have reached out to many more, but I said 3 of you. And why the 3 of you? Because here is what I believe, and you all implied that in some form or the other. We always teach who we are. Irrespective of what we teach, we always teach who we are. So I think there is such an important need for us to role model whatever it is that we are trying to get our students to take responsibility for. And that is such an important part of what we are talking about. And then we are saying, the 5th dimension, we are saying that when we talk about accreditation, I mean, what is that? What is that metaphor? It is saying that, are we first making a promise? Are we then living up to that promise in the way we run our own institution, in the culture that we build that Ranjan talked about? Is that really living up to the promise we are making? And I love the fact that students are not customers. I completely agree with that. Students are not customers. I would say they are important stakeholders. They are part of the ecosystem and a very critical part of the ecosystem. But we are not here to sell something to them, and we are not here to say, give us feedback on whether we have sold in the right way and whether we have serviced you in the right way. I think it has to be a much deeper relationship rather than just a commercial relationship of that kind. And what gives me hope is this aspect that Rishi, you talked about, that, when you talked about that, when you launched the 5-year program, it was not simply making an intention. You resisted the temptation of making a BBA out of the first 3 years program. You really said that this is important for us to ask new questions. And we have to get people together in that whole respect. So I think this was something very nice. I can't thank you enough. There are so many gems of wisdom that have come out. And Vidya, thank you very much for hosting this webinar. I must say I chair the Chinmaya Vidyalaya school, and the principal and other people had been telling me, Anil, why don't we do on the new education policy, let's get all the top educators in the country together. And I said, this is not about another discourse where people just come and give presentations and talk. Let's have some honest dialogue. So I'm so glad that we were able to cover that ground. And thank you, the SOIL students. Thank you, the participants who have come into this webinar. And it's been very joyful to host all of you today. And we hope to keep creating platforms where we bring wonderful leaders like Ranjan and Rishi and Debashis together, so we can together create and discover new ideas together. So thank you very much. And Ranjan, you wanted to leave in 10 minutes, and we are ending the webinar 3 minutes before time. So, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you to both professors, and thank you to all colleagues.
Thank you,
and students.
Thank you, Vidya, and Ranjan, of course, as always, good to speak to you.
Yeah, great fun. Thank you so much. But Vidya, if you could just forward the recordings, if the recordings are shareable afterwards, then I think
we'll do that. We were just
Absolutely.
want to even ask you if we could put you, by name, tag you on the media. So we didn't do it beforehand without your permission. So yes, we were just wondering if we could tag you on the social media when we do a post up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can.
I'm sure you have the permission. They are all both very social.
An issue, but maybe we want to look at it once.
Okay, sure. We'll be mindful of it.
I generally take responsibility for what I say. You can go ahead. That's fine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sure, Ranjan, we'll definitely share the link of the recording once.
This should be okay, but if I think it should be okay. You can go ahead.
Fair enough. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.